Hello and welcome to an aviation podcast hosted by 270 Aviation. With offices across the globe, our team of consultants discuss the latest developments across the aviation industry and share the insights they've gained working alongside some of the world's major airports and airlines over the past 20 years. So whether you're a seasoned professional or a budding aviation enthusiast, take a moment to sit back, plug your earphones in and join us over a warm cup of coffee.
On this episode, the team discussed the importance of sustainability for the aviation industry and explore some of the initiatives airports are undertaking to aid the push to net zero emissions by 2050. Over to your host.
Welcome to the show, everyone. My name's Robin, and today I am with Rob and David, and we'll be talking about sustainability at airports. So to start off, Rob, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Rob Morris. I work for 270 Aviation as a senior aviation consultant, and I specialise in environmental studies, sustainability and master planning. And hopefully today we can share a few key concepts around sustainability in the aviation industry.
Amazing. And David, what about yourself?
Hi, I'm David Nee. I'm an aviation consultant at 270 Australia. I mostly work on the environmental projects, especially in noise at 270 Aviation.
Beautiful. With air travel demand dropping to levels considerably lower than forecasted figures, one of the key benefactors at the moment is the environment, with emissions dropping up to 8% in the first quarter of this year. As the aviation industry plans for a post-COVID recovery, we are asking the questions around, will there be an additional pressure to maintain this reduction in emissions? And are there any net zero and sustainability initiatives that airports will be looking at? So today we'll discuss how the pressure to increase sustainability across the industry will affect airports and what are the best ways forward to ensure that these sustainability targets are going to be met. So to start off, what does sustainability mean for the aviation industry?
Sustainability is one of the key parts of the aviation industry, especially right now when COVID has hit. And I believe sustainability for the aviation industry is about maintaining the environment that they operate in. So not just the planet and the environment, but also the social and economic portions as well. And the key word is maintain, which is to not affect their ability to operate in the future. And I think that's really what the aviation industry needs currently.
David hit the sort of the nail on the head. This is about airports operating in their communities as, I guess, good corporate citizens. They provide a valuable service, but at the same time, they also need to make sure that they don't impact the lives and surroundings in which they sit. And it's about maintaining a smaller footprint as possible on the impact that you have on the environment and the community.
Yeah, definitely. The industry as a whole, sustainability is really important because we need that interaction with the community because one, the industry is serving the community, and two, we want to stay where we are and be able to grow in a way that doesn't affect the environment. Why is sustainability so important to airports right now?
Well, I think one of the things that they're going to have to tackle is that at the moment, there is a significant reduction in aircraft emissions. There's a significant reduction in aircraft noise, which is accompanying, of course, a significant reduction in aircraft travel. So along with those downsides, which are obvious, there are some environmental upsides. And I think what will happen is as airports start to get back on an even keel and start moving forward and growing again, there's going to be more pushback from the community in terms of, where have my environmental gains gone? Why has the noise come back? Why has the pollution come back? And I think there will be a lot of pressure on airports and airlines and all participants in the aviation industry to try and lock in some of the gains that have been made or to try and regain some of them in a very short period of time after the aviation industry picks up again. I think you'll find that once the gains have been made, once people see what it's like with cleaner air, less noise, there's going to be a lot of pushback against trying to increase it again.
Yeah, and not just from people, also from governments as well. There's already been pushback from the government even before the whole COVID crisis going on. So I believe there's pressure on all sides for the aviation industry to be more sustainable.
Yeah, I think it'll also tackle the industry on a secondary viewpoint as well, which is investment dollars. You know, a lot of airports are privately owned. A lot of the privately owned airports in Australia, for instance, are invested in by significant superannuation funds and big investment funds, and therefore they're subject to the whims of their investors and their members. And what will happen is over time, investment funds are becoming more picky. They are more concerned about things like ethical investments and making sure that, you know, the money they're earning isn't coming from sources which are, bad for climate change, bad for community engagement, and all those sort of things. So investment dollars are becoming more picky. And it won't happen straight away, but over time, as more attractive investments occur in other areas, airports will find it harder to pick up money if they don't sort of play the sustainability and environmental friendliness game.
Yeah, it's definitely investors seem to be looking for that balance of profit and revenue generation from the airports, but also how are they fitting into the rest of the world? What do sustainability practices look like at airports at the moment?
Well, currently, mostly airports have been focusing on, I wouldn't say small, but just moderately sized projects. So there's been a lot of effort from Air Services Australia and airports to make more efficient flight paths. That's one of them, just to help decrease the amount of emissions as well as noise. And then there's also airport projects themselves. A lot of airports are actually moving to greener energy. For example, there's Adelaide Airport who have installed a large solar array on their large car parking facility, as well as moving to EV vehicles for their operations. So that's a lot of initiatives, similar initiatives a lot of airports are taking to reduce their carbon footprint and to be more sustainable. Those are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head for now, but I'm sure there's heaps more.
Oh, there's loads of them. And I guess just for the uninitiated, what David's referring to with the airspace changes is that aircraft tend to use a lot more fuel when they're leveling out and then climbing or descending, and then leveling out and climbing and descending. They're much more efficient if they can lock into a straight climb or a straight descent and just hold a constant power setting until they get to the required altitude. So at the moment, under the way airspace works, if it gets a little bit inefficient for whatever reason, then you might find aircraft having to level off, wait a while, and then they climb again, or level off and wait a while before they can descend again. And that is a lot more fuel inefficient than maintaining a constant climb or a constant descent. In terms of other things, sustainability obviously for airports is a double-edged blade. There's also sustainability from a business standpoint. They need to make sure that they can continue to operate, that they're not a constant drain on their investors and the local economy in which they sit. So they've got to find a way to continue making money and continue being profitable whilst continuing to service their primary customers, which is the airlines and the passengers and the freight services that use them. But in terms of what else is sustainable, there's lots of other things. Airports over time have become, they're quite large, flat areas of land. They need to do a lot of work to make sure that their water management is correct. Airports can't function if they become inundated or flooded, so therefore drainage and stormwater management all needs to be managed. Things like energy production. It's nowadays not uncommon to find significant solar arrays around airports, like David alluded to, maybe on buildings, but they also sit in the corners of fields. Airports are quite keen on the idea of generating their own power and using their land to make sure that that they're getting the best value out of the assets that they have. But then those things come with a whole set of their own issues that need to be resolved anyway. There's things like waste management and pollution management. So there's a lot of on-site facilities and concessionaries that are in airports, the hamburger joints, the pubs, the newsagents, the stores. They all generate waste. That has to be managed. It has to be managed in the most efficient way possible at the best sort of rate of cost. Within aircraft operations, there's a lot of chemicals and substances that are used, which might be considered hazardous to the environment or to personnel around the airport. And they also need to be managed and properly stored and made sure that they don't deteriorate over time. One of the big ones that a lot of people might have heard of at the moment in aviation is PFAS, which was a chemical that's contained in fire retardant foam, which is used by the aviation fire services. And over the years, this product first started being used, I think, in the late 1970s or the early 1980s. Lots of tests have been done, and this chemical has got into the environment and it doesn't break down. It's now sort of sitting there in significant amounts at most airport sites in Australia. And the cleanup operation and the investigations underway to try and make sure that the problem, A, doesn't get any worse, and B, can be resolved over time, is going to cost a lot of money and it's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah, when I worked on some construction projects when I was working at an airport, a big part of that planning process is getting all the environmental checks done. You have to do soil tests to ensure that there's no PFAS in the ground. If you need to do any sort of digging up of the area, it's quite a time-consuming and costly side of development at an airport, and what needs to be done to ensure that we're meeting all the regulatory requirements.
That's correct. I mean, it's also an off-site regulatory issue because PFAS and PFOS are very mobile substances once they get into the environment. We've worked with an airport where downstream, water flows have taken these chemicals into a Ramsar wetland, which is obviously a protected area, and subsequently the area was shut down for things like recreational fishing. You had residents being told that they weren't allowed to consume any plants or animals that were grown or caught within the environs of the airport. EPA got involved. It can become a huge issue.
Yep, and you can obviously lose a lot of goodwill with the people as well.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to some of those initial sustainability initiatives that we talked about before, particularly electric vehicles, my question is, how do you measure the change in emissions? So how are airports able to actually identify that this change in technology that they're using is actually going to help them?
So electric vehicles, they usually count the amount of energy that they produce on their own, and they kind of use that to offset their overall emissions. That's usually the way it works in terms of calculating the actual effectiveness of the cars themselves and the initiative that they've taken. Obviously, sometimes they don't account for some of the manufacturing emissions for the vehicles themselves as well. So yeah, it's a very, high level approach in carbon accounting.
Yeah, and I'm sure where you are would depend on where that electricity itself is coming from. Different states would have different levels of renewable energies within their grid.
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to the whole point around, before airports can really get a handle on managing their carbon emissions, they need to measure them. And there are now processes underway whereby they can do that. And that's definitely something that 270 is involved in helping airports understand what their carbon totals are. And I'm just through the ACI accreditation program, which I think I'll let David talk to a bit more because he's actually an accredited reviewer for ACI, whereby airports can get to various levels within the ACI matrix, showing how much work they've done to understand and manage their carbon emissions.
The ACI program. Yeah, it's a great program that a lot of airports are actually taking on board now. It's even one of the programs that the Australian government is recommending airports do as part of their action plan for reducing carbon emissions in the aviation sector. So the basic approach to this program is that you have 4 levels of accreditation. The first one being mapping, where you're doing a general carbon accounting for your airport and setting up general policy for having a greener airport. And then you move on to level 2, which is where you start producing initiatives to sort of lower your carbon emissions on a rolling, I think it was 2-year basis. And then you have level 3, which is where you start influencing carbon emissions from third parties. So that includes airlines, even your tenants. And then you move on to level 3 plus, which is carbon neutral. So this involves the last 3 levels, but you start eliminating the remaining carbon emissions from your airport, usually using offsets. And so, yeah, this gives you a structured program for airports of all operation sizes. So you have small airports usually opting for level 1, and then a medium airport for level 2 or 3, and then larger airports can go for the carbon neutral one.
So it's not a one-time fix, though, is it? Like, this seems to be something that you need to be continuously looking at and continue on that measuring and monitoring what's happening as you go up through the steps.
Yeah, so this program isn't a set and forget type of program. It's a continuous program where you have to continuously improve on your emissions. So your airport's actually reviewed every 2 years just to see how it's going in terms of its targets and KPIs. And that way you can sort of renew your accreditation for your airport. So you can't just get it approved or verified once and then just keep the label there on your airport. You'll have to keep continuously improving to renew your accreditation.
So it actually expires, does it, the accreditation?
Yeah, so it actually does expire. You're definitely required to renew it every 2 years.
Maybe they'll have to start changing the logo to make sure nobody uses an old sticker.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, that's one of the incentives. The logo actually changes every level. So you have a single tree for level 1 and then a more vibrant one the next one.
Do they have like you've been level 3 for 3 years, and then they add a little 3 years at the bottom or something?
Oh, yes,
so you can keep on showing, this is how I'm improving.
Yeah, so it proves that you're improving and you're carbon neutral. And that definitely generates a lot of goodwill for the public who are more environmentally conscious now.
Yeah, and you'd have to say that in Australia, all the major airports are tackling this. So yeah, we've worked on carbon accreditation projects for at least 3 out of the 5 major airports in Australia.
And they're all continuously improving as well.
Are there any other accreditations that industry will utilize as a benchmarking tool to help them on their journey towards this net zero emissions and a truly sustainable airport operation?
Look, I think that's probably the significant one in terms of airport-specific accreditation. There are other accreditation schemes out there that are linked back to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals on the UN site. Some of them don't necessarily relate to airports. So things like making sure nobody suffers from starvation or water shortages isn't necessarily down to airports, but there definitely are segments of the UN Charter that do apply to airports. And there are companies that have taken those SDGs and are now building levels of corporate certification and compliance in relation to those, so that companies can walk around with, like I say, a sticker or a certificate or a badge that they can put onto their emails and paraphernalia, which says, we are a global sustainable citizen. We meet the requirements for these sustainable development goals as outlined by the UN. And I think there's companies like B Corporation and that will go through your corporate entity and do an audit and let you know, how you stack up, I guess, against other companies that are trying to do the same thing. To the best of my knowledge, there's no airports that have yet done that, but I would not be surprised if at some point it does happen. Somebody sort of reaches out to be the most environmentally friendly or sustainable airport in the world. It also covers things like sort of the more cultural sustainability things. So things like making sure that you preserve cultural heritage sites or sites of value that are adjacent to or on the airport. And that may be sites that pre-existed the airport itself. Like, for instance, in Australia, there's a lot of indigenous sites that are probably protected by airports. I know that we do an indigenous review or a cultural heritage site review whenever we do some master planning work for airports to make sure that nothing's been added to the register in the time since the last master plan was done. Or it may be assets, heritage assets that are on the airport itself. There are certain airport buildings and infrastructure items around Australia that are protected by heritage overlays. And for instance, the runway at Newcastle Airport is the first concrete runway built in Australia, and is protected by heritage assets. I don't know what's going to do when they want to rebuild it.
I know there's a lot of the major airports in Australia really have a focus on sustainability, and they've started publishing sustainability focused reports. And a lot of it is looking at the UN initiatives, and they're talking about gender pay equity in their companies. There's things like sustainability linked loans. There's a big focus on safety, because the safer your operations are, the more sustainable it will be in terms of efficiency and operation. They're looking at a lot around the responsible business side of things, so ensuring that the supply chain is ethical and it's being operated with integrity. It's definitely more than just emissions and aircraft noise, and it's really interesting to see how that's developing, and the airports seem to be taking a step away from just that carbon accreditation process and really looking into different benchmarking to ensure that they are keeping their investors happy.
Well, that's right. I mean, it goes back to the discussion we touched on earlier about investment dollars and that as well. The next generation of people who are going to be aviation consumers, passengers, are a much more discerning generation when it comes to environmental sustainability. They are worried about climate. They are worried about a lot of the things that are on the SDG list, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. They do care about, gender equality. They do care about pay equality. They do care about the effect that Western economies have on so-called third world countries. There are much more, I hate using the word woke, sort of sector of the community, and that's wokeness, if you like. We'll be coming to an airport near you.
Yeah, that just comes back to the whole definition of sustainability. It's not just about the environment; it's about the economy, social as well, humans as well, and it's not always just about the environmental factors as well.
Definitely.
No, it's a much broader brush now than it ever used to be.
Before we go, Rob, would you be able to tell us a little bit about how 270 has gotten involved in sustainability at airports?
So in terms of 270's operations, we've been finding over the last 5 years that we are getting a lot more involved in projects that relate to sustainability, whether that be airlines trying to improve their fuel emissions, whether that be airports that are trying to meet regulatory standards or improve their energy efficiency or gain accreditation, environmental studies. There are a lot of projects that we are currently doing that are related to this, and we're finding that it's a growing part of our portfolio.
Thank you for your time this week, gentlemen. Where can people find you?
Yep, hi, I'm David Nee. You can find me on LinkedIn at David Nee.
And this is Rob Morris, also on LinkedIn at rob.morris.
Thank you for listening. To contact any of the hosts from this episode, please go to the links in the post description. For more info regarding the topics discussed in today's show, please visit our website, www.to70.com, where you can also access all our published industry articles in our blog section. To provide feedback on today's show or to simply inquire about our services, please contact us at info@to70.com.au. Until next time, safe travels.